It should be a wireless one.
My good friend Chris will allow me to share his mic with you.
This is how rumors get started.
Thank you for coming here this morning. As you can tell, this promises to be a lively session. Let me introduce the two of our speakers today. First, let me say thank you to Crescendo Interactive, who is the sponsor for this session of this morning's presentation. Melanie Norton is the founder and lead consultant for Norton Philanthropic Counsel, NPC, a full-service philanthropic consulting firm in Indianapolis, Indiana, dedicated to highly customized and relationship-focused strategies that blend the art and science of philanthropy to promote client success. Melanie is a certified fundraising executive and holds an MBA from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University and a BA in Business from Franklin College. She was the 2016 National Chairman of the Board for the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners and is also a past president and former board member for the Planned Giving Group of Indiana, as well as the Rotary Club of Indianapolis. To summarize, Christopher Kelly, he's the director of major and planned giving for the Schoolcraft College Foundation. With more than 30 years of experience in trust, estate, and philanthropic planning, Mr. Kelly began his career in charitable planning on the financial side of the planning table as a philanthropic advisor with bank and brokerage house trust companies, most recently with PNC Institutional Asset Management. He's a frequent guest speaker at conferences, most recently at the American Council of Gift Annuities National Conference, as well as educational programs and donor seminars across the country. He is a member of the Planned Giving Roundtable of Southeast Michigan, the past president of the Council Board, past chair of the mentoring program, and current Leave a Legacy co-chair. Chris served as a national board member of the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, and was the chair of the 2013 National Conference in Minneapolis. Before joining the gift planning community, he was a professional opera singer, debuting with the Michigan Opera Theater in Detroit, Michigan, and has performed with various opera companies and orchestras throughout the United States and Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corinne. That had to be the most awkward introduction I've ever seen. So you're a trooper for sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Chris and I are delighted to have an opportunity to speak with you today about the relationship as the person stuck in the middle between the donor and the business officer. So we'll start with a little disclaimer. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. This presentation shamelessly exploits the appeal of dogs and puppies. No canines were harmed during the production of this presentation. Any resemblance to actual dogs or dog owners is purely coincidental unless otherwise identified. And I will say we have another doggy owner in the audience today. So individual results may vary, but if you're feeling generous at the end of the presentation, you can throw it on. Or if you think this presentation has gone to the dogs, you're probably right. So. But we wanted to talk today just about the relationship. I don't know if you've ever felt like this, right? So you have the three puppies trying to get out the same door at the same time. And the one in the middle might feel a little bit like the gift planner from time to time, right? We're stuck in the middle between our donors who are wanting to do wonderful things for our organizations and maybe our colleagues back at the ranch who are also wanting certain things from gifts and gift processes. So today we're going to talk about understanding the perspectives of all three, the gift receiving and recognition issues as well. We're going to talk a little bit about deciphering the different languages of giving that the different partners in the process may be using, and then hopefully giving you some helpful tips to secure gifts that can celebrate, everyone can celebrate as a win. So if that sounds like a fair agenda today, we'll go ahead and get started.
So let's start with the gift scenario. And as you can see, if you thought it was impossible to overdress for a donor meeting, you were so wrong. This is Jenny Generous, and she has been a long-time giver to the organization. She makes annual gifts. She's done a series of charitable gift annuities, which shows she understands that planning is very important to have a true impact on the mission of the organization. She's a textbook that we all would love to see, whether in Louis Vuitton or not. She has no children. She's talked about doing a significant legacy gift for the organization. And basically, she has a really wonderful relationship with us. We have good communication. She feels very good about it. And Perry Persistent, who represents us all, feels that they are copacetic. They are always working together. He knows what Jenny's thinking at all times. We'll see. Let's go on. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say the most important part. The organization is in a capital campaign, and Ginny has just said she would like to make a $200,000 contribution to the campaign. It's the first of this size for her. So very important information to keep in the back of your mind. Mel?
So what's not to love, right? Doesn't this sound like kind of the dream scenario for all of us and what we'd love to have? So we start to dig in a little bit more into the $200,000 commitment, and we find out that it's a combination of cash and real estate. We also find out that with that gift, Jenny would like to name this lovely conference room. The real estate, and by the way, these are based on real scenarios. This is not a figment of our imagination. It's 800 miles away. It is 3 vacant lots that have been through 2 100-year floods in the past decade. Jenny paid $50,000 apiece for the lots and has passed on previous offers to purchase. So this is a little bit what we feel like after we dig into the gift a little bit more and hear the details, right? So our little friend the pug is sort of representing what we might feel like. So
Kind of what I feel like every morning. And here, no, this was not me. But we can sometimes feel like we are under a microscope when we're in these scenarios. You know, number one, how are we going to generate a situation that's satisfying to everyone? Because there are 3 components in every gift scenario, and it's like a marriage. Well, that's kind of unhealthy, 3 people in marriage. Let's just say it's like a really good friendship. And the bottom line is, we have to have an understanding of the perspectives. This is where sometimes things go wrong. We hear one thing, but our donor is saying something else, and we need to make sure that we're all on the same page. We need to manage those expectations, and that can only happen when we have really effective communication. You know, our dear friend Catherine Myrie, who I always talk about, she really is one of my heroes in gift planning, has always said that to really make sure that everybody has an understanding of the gift, we should put it on paper, even before legal documents are being drawn. That way, if there's any questions, any concern, we can do the tweaking on that paper before anything goes awry and we're worried about a relationship. And then, of course, transparency. The more that we're communicating, the more that we're being open and upfront about 3 lots that have been through 2 100-year floods, I mean, that's a lot of water. So those are things that we need to know upfront and be able to communicate to our colleagues on our side of the table, because eventually they're going to be the ones that have to deal with these pieces of property. Anything to add there, Chief?
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think in terms of generating a satisfying experience, these are so key. And not anything you probably haven't heard before, but really incredibly important. So we'll dive a little bit in this next section into perhaps what each of the parties is thinking, right? So we have our gift scenario, and this is the donor. Super happy, right? The donor is really excited, making the largest gift they've ever made. Donor might be thinking something like this: this is the right gift for me. I'm so glad I can participate in the campaign at this level, right? This is, as Chris mentioned earlier, the largest gift Jenny has ever made to the organization. So even though she knows that she has a larger gift coming someday. She hasn't disclosed the amount to the organization, and this is a big deal for her, right? The other thing she may be thinking, and again, these quotes may not be this exact scenario, they're not made up. We've heard things like this before. So she may also think, you know, I really hope they appreciate the sacrifice that I'm making for this gift, right? So Jenny doesn't know exactly how long she's going to live or whether or not she'll meet all of her assets. So to her, she's making a pretty big sacrifice to make this gift happen. So, but generally speaking, she's happy about this opportunity.
But we would like to warn you that if your donor is panting during the meeting, either the room is too warm or you have other issues that need to be dealt with. So the gift planner themselves, that's us. What are they thinking? Well, first and foremost, Yahoo! We just made a $200,000 commitment to our capital campaign. We're looking at our donor. This is a friend of ours. This isn't just somebody who gives us money when we need it. This is a friend of ours. So we need to review our relationship with Jenny. It's going to help us from a number of ways. Number one, helping to shape the gift so that it is a satisfying experience for her as well as for our organization. Also, what has she given in the past? This can help us figure out the direction of why we came up with a real estate gift and the cash gift. And also, we're really happy that she's finally making a gift of this size. Why? Not only helps us with goals, not only helps us with the capital campaign, but you know what, folks, in my mind, it's solidifying that legacy gift that she's been talking about, all of our relationship, is probably going to happen. Because somebody who's going to make that large of a commitment now is probably going to keep their word about that legacy or testamentary gift. So, good reason to jump in the air as well, but hold off on doing this until after your donor leaves.
So it's important to say if we have any friends in business and finance in the audience today, that this is not an attempt to disparage our friends in business and finance. It's rather an opportunity to give the rest of us who are not a lens into what they're thinking. So a former colleague of mine who works in business and finance also helped with this presentation early on. But the business officer might feel a little more like this. So they could be thinking, again, what? Have you heard this before? Why couldn't Perry just talk the donor into a cash gift? How many people have heard something like that before at their organization, right? Yeah, I mean, cash is much easier, right? And from that perspective, it's something we can utilize right away. So that might be what the business officer or finance professional is thinking, even if they don't say it. They also might be saying something like this: handling the sale of this real estate is going to be a time-consuming nightmare. So this is based off of a real scenario for me that took about 2 years to actually come to fruition, and a lot of time and pain. But how many have also heard something like this, right? We may not be the ones necessarily who have to deal with a lot of the complexities of selling the real estate. So rightfully so, someone and the other part of our other counterparts in the organization might be thinking something more along the lines of that. So,
And you know, this is another great place for you to make sure you're talking and communicating with your own colleague. Because if they're sitting there thinking, why real estate? What are you doing? This is going to be a nightmare. If we can talk about ways to make sure that the real estate does not become an albatross, but really is a good gift, then they can relax and maybe join us in that jump of Yahoo! And moving on. So our donor themselves, of course they're happy. They just decided to make a $200,000 gift. There's a little bit of pride that they are entitled to there. And let's face it, a lot of times not only are our donors really excited about having an impact on our mission, but think about it. When you're able to say that you made a very large gift to a capital campaign, you really had an impact on it, that kind of solidifies who you are in society, you know? And that's what we want to make sure that our donors feel, that they are pillars of society, and we love them for doing it. Now, here's a little bit of the drawback. Many times, people have an emotional tie to an asset. Ever had that happen? And most of the time, it's with real property. It's sort of like we all saw Gone with the Wind, and we heard Daddy O'Hara say, the land, it's always the land, Icky Scarlet. Well, the fact of the matter is, not all of Terra was worth $150,000. So we have to here begin to set some expectations. And it's good to talk about how when we become a donor, we actually divest ourselves from ownership of the property, and that once it's come over as a gift, we really don't have control of that sale. If Jenny wants to control it, then Jenny may have to do another step that we could help her with. But as far as an outright gift into the capital campaign, we really have to make sure that we're setting the right expectations right up front, and that it might not land $150,000.
Yeah, and in this section too, I think the first section, if you remember, was sort of titled, what are they thinking? And we're trying to get into the mindset of our three counterparts. And this one is how are they tracking? And by tracking, we're also sort of referring to the actual dollar amount. So in the mind of the donor, you know, she's tracking this as a $200,000 gift and the land worth $150,000. The gift planner, again, very excited, tracking with the Yahoo. And what? I just closed a $200,000 gift for my organization, right? So important for us. We work hard for these gifts. We work a long time, often years, with our donors, and so we're excited about that. And we may also be thinking something along these lines. Even though selling the real estate might be a challenge, it's certainly better than just a $50,000 cash gift, right? So from the perspective of the gift planner, this is likely how we may be tracking this gift. So,
and we have to be prepared for that. Remember, as gift planners, what have we always said? Gifts from your accumulated wealth can be larger, more impactful than just gifts from disposable income. So that's where some of this comes from, and we have to be prepared to not only help keep the perspectives in line with our donor, but also our colleagues on our side of the shop.
so again, our friend the business officer might be feeling a little bit like this.
And the first thing they're gonna think about is, okay, there's development again, going to lunch and getting a gift that they're claiming is $200,000, when in fact, I'm gonna be lucky if I get $125,000 for that lousy property that they claimed was part of Terra. And the fact of the matter is, that would be the first thing that would come into anybody's mind, because we have to think about things like, is it going to appraise for what the donor claims it's worth? Is it going to actually sell for that dollar amount? And if we're in a capital campaign for something like a building, we've got bills coming in. We have to pay the construction people. We have to get this building up and running. So our colleague is thinking in terms of, okay, $150,000, but I can't use it to pay for the building right now. What am I going to do? My way of thinking again, remember when we started and we saw that Ginny had done a lot of things, annual giving, had set up some charitable gift annuities. Here's another way that we might be able to keep that look off our colleague's face by talking about some options that maybe Ginny can continue to help us with. Maybe she doesn't always need every single distribution from the CGAs, and those contributions might go into making the $200,000 gift even larger. It's all in the planning, and we all have to think. Mel?
So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you might measure success, and certainly in terms of the way that you may feel about the gift, I think this is important. It's one of the questions I love to ask as I go into any engagement, what the definition of success is. We have Church Mathis here. His daddy is Kevin Mathis at Legacy Leaders, but the donor is thinking, again, sleeping easy, right? Resting well, knowing that, again, Jenny's so pleased she can make a significant gift to the campaign. She hopes her friends will follow, right? So she's passionate about the organization and delighted to be able to have an opportunity to do this. She also feels good about the fact that, again, we've alluded to this earlier, she's proud to know that the organization is going to get a much larger gift later. So it feels good for her to do this. And so she's she's measuring success in terms of the way she feels, which is pretty good, and she's resting easy.
Again, we don't always yell Yahoo every day, but sometimes when you've been working with a donor and working with a donor and working with a donor and something finally gives and they finally give, you do feel like jumping in the air and screaming Yahoo. Because we're dealing with people, individuals, with moods and also timing. What's important to them? Is it a good time for me to make this gift? These aren't walking, talking ATM machines that we're dealing with here, or our jobs would be a lot easier. So it is something to celebrate. You should be feeling good, even when the gift could be in components that might not be as comfortable for everyone. And as far as now, I can go back and I can tell my boss, I can tell the board, I can tell everybody that we just landed this wonderful gift and I've made my goals. Absolutely. Not just to assure yourself that your chair is going to be there the next morning when you need it, but you all know me well enough to know I'm very Machiavellian when it comes to gift planning. And success does breed success. So when we're able to talk about a donor that maybe a lot of people know, especially someone that wears Gucci scarves, giant sunglasses, and carries Louis Vuitton bags, that's information that might make someone else feel, well, if she can do it, I can do it too. And especially our board members. Our board members can be donors. They're not just sitting in a chair once a month or once a quarter. They should be supporting the organization financially as well.
So that's Maverick Martin. His daddy is Joe Martin at PNC in Dallas. So this is Tinker. This is my niece dog, Tinkerbell Norton. And she's got one of her favorite toys, her little monkey on her back there. So again, the business officer may be feeling a little bit differently about that. Certainly measuring success by trying to figure out how quickly can we convert this real estate to cash, right? So as we talked about earlier, we're in a campaign, we're building a building, Jenny's name is going on a conference room. We need to convert that real estate as quickly as possible to cash. You know, this is another one that I've heard too. I hope the board will understand why we quote unquote hit our campaign goal and we still can't finish the building, right? So there are real pressure points, certainly for our colleagues across the organization, that I think are important for us to keep in mind, and circling back again to the importance of communication and expectations on the front end. I think we can't stress that enough to everyone in the audience today.
And as we said earlier, no animals were harmed during this, but we didn't say that they weren't humiliated. But you know, also in this point about not being able to finish the building, this is also why we have to continue being planners. If the gift isn't transitioning into liquidity to pay bills right away, we need to be thinking also where else can we help come up with what we need? How else can we work this relationship so that it continues to be a major success? It's not done just because the ink has been put on the document. Going on. Okay, so this is something that we would like all of you to be involved in right now. What do you think? Are these perspectives that are typical in what you see in your shops every day or what you've been dealing with? What do donors, your donors, think is the difference between giving an outright gift versus a deferred or a blended gift, and how does it feel to close a complete gift transaction? Is there a difference in the satisfaction level between getting that check handed to you right away or having to wait on the deferred gift? So the floor is open. We're looking for your feedback. Christina.
So, and I think it all depends on the personality of the gift officer, but for me at least, those gifts make me very nervous and uncomfortable. So the Yahoo is 100% and I would do that, but then a part of me, then the worry will set in. And so it's not just the business officer. I think a lot of the gift officers want to see that gift really be fruitful and it transpire to something even greater than what we thought it might even be, higher than the $200,000 level.
So what Christina is saying is, yeah, to have a $200,000 gift come in that's partially gift, partially deferred, is a reason to scream Yahoo, but her concern is what's going to happen with that, waiting for that other part of it to come in, or to transition, thought I glued them in, transition into liquidity that we can use right away. Actually, very good point. And why we need to keep the communication going, and why we always have to think of alternate plan Bs to make sure that everybody's happy and feeling good. Anybody else?
How do donors feel when they make an outright gift versus a planned gift? Do they feel any sort of difference in terms of, let's say, the dollar amount? Anybody wanna, yeah?
I think outright gifts are a lot scarier to donors in general. That, what if I need this money later? And a deferred gift is kind of easier for them to say, you know, well, out of what's left of my estate, then they get some money.
Good point. Carol's saying that in her experience, sometimes a donor may feel that the outright gift is a little bit scarier because to be a donor, to meet the standing for donorship, when you give it, it's done. You've divested yourself. And what if that's income or liquidity that you may need personally later? You can't go back to the charity and say, I know I gave you $25,000, but I need 20 of it back. Would that be okay? Yes, ma'am.
I'm with the Michigan Humane Society, #1, so I really enjoyed your slide. Secondly, I think also I've had the experience where the gift during their lifetime is really rewarding because I've had donors say, I'm so glad to be able to be here to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that the legacy gift is in the works, or they, like Jenny, have intimated it's coming. But to your point, I always think that that is the bellwether for what's coming down the pipe.
Absolutely.
And I think the bigger reward might be in their lifetime, and we've had discussions along those lines with other donors.
Sure.
And I think you've probably heard both of us saying how that's where blended giving can make the biggest difference,
Yeah.
because there's some of it coming in right now. It might be an annual gift coming in from the blended strategy, and then some legacy at the end, so that we don't feel like we've given everything away and now we're going to be in the poorhouse as a donor. So different levels of satisfaction, different levels of comfort, and we as gift planners have to be aware of all of it. Any other opinions you want to share? Paul?
Yeah, so I was just looking at my phone, finishing a real estate gift right now. And from my vantage point, you gotta do all of them because cash is the most difficult thing to get, so you just do it. I think the assumption, some of this video, the presentation is that you have a department or you have attorneys on retainer that, boom, are ready for your priorities. So when I accepted this, it was a real estate gift up in Harbor Springs, I'm thinking, okay, is this person that I'm gonna work with the urgency to get this done in time? Are they gonna do it well? What kind of priority are there? So I don't have as much, for lack of a term, leverage in management. I can't walk down the hall. If I was at a big university or something, I'd say, okay, maybe they have a whole department that we could hand this off to. I don't have that. So there is a little bit of, can we pull off what we're talking about to make the donor experience the best, and to be able to make sure there's not this line with either an attorney that we have on retainer or staff, that this isn't like, gosh, I'm kind of learning as I go, because this is something that generally doesn't happen all the time. For me, it's maybe 2 or 3 times a year tops, maybe.
Sure.
So.
Sure. I mean, generally speaking, I think you hit the nail on the head, and that's really what we're trying to do. And we'll get into a little bit more of sort of that internal relationship here in a second. But I think you hit the nail on the head. Who feels the most responsibility to the donor? We do, right? I mean, we're the ones with the relationship, and unfortunately, it's not uncommon that others don't, right?
Yeah,
and it might not be intentional, but they just don't have the same relationship that we have with the donor.
I mean, a real example is this person is going to Europe, and I went down a tough job. I had to go down to Florida in the winter and take care of the sacrifices I made.
And I was just going to yell at you for
No,
using your cell
exactly.
phone during the presentation.
Rightly so, please yell at me. I have a bad habit of that. and then, but the individual said, I just want to be free of this by the time I go to Europe. But then you got the back end saying, well, we have 15 other priorities that,
Sure.
that are on par or even above that.
Yeah.
And so, you
So
just
we
kind of
don't-
have this pit in your stomach to say, how can I play nice in the sandbox to make sure this happens and is executed well? And that's the key as well, because you can't, so that's
Yeah.
just real life stuff you have to deal with.
And the reality is complexities, and dealing with the complexities and the length of time that it can take to deal with some of the things, where we're slotting in the priority list for someone else, a counterpart in the organization, all very true, because that impacts, again, the donor. We're used to being accommodating, right? I mean, that's part of our job. We do everything we can to make sure that a gift closes and that it's a good gift and that it's a smooth process and it's easy for the donor, right? That may not necessarily be the case elsewhere, and so it is definitely a dance, and often requires a lot of negotiation with your counterparts. I always found that the easier I could make it for my counterparts, the better off we would be, and sometimes going a few steps beyond what I might normally do to help with regard to those type of gifts, I think was helpful. But that's sort of our nature for doing this work as the fundraiser, right? And so we do want to point out with the fur mother of Stuart Brown, please raise their hand. Yay! Tina on the front. Stuart is thinking hard there. You can see he's really thinking about this. So.
Well, and Mel made a really good point too. If we go that extra step for our colleagues in situations like this, not only are they more understanding of us, the next time there's a gift around, they know we are not going to be handing them something and then walking away and dancing our Yahoo dance. We will be there with them to make sure that the gift gets done correctly.
The other point I wanted to make, when a donor writes you a $10,000 check for a gift annuity or a $10,000 check, do they feel a difference in terms of what they've given up? Because there's a reciprocal benefit for the first one? Or do they feel like they've given you $10,000? In my experience, they feel like they've given you $10,000, right? I mean, there is a reciprocal benefit, and someone across campus or across the organization may understand that liability, but from the donor's perspective, they look at their checkbook and $10,000 is gone. So, that's sort of part of what we're thinking about too, is sort of how do you relay that to your counterparts and help them understand that as well. So your royalty check will be coming. So I think bridging the gap, again, having the right people at the table, speaking the same language is so important. And I'm not going to make any guesses as to who's who in this scenario, but you can fill in based on your own experiences. But again, having the opportunity to have the right people at the table is so important, right? You've heard this a million times if you've been to very many conferences. The donor's advisors, to the extent that they can, family, if that's possible, certainly all helpful in terms of clear communication and expectations on the front end. Certainly the gift officers, the development office, and then also our friends in business and finance or administration. Again, making sure that we're communicating with them what it is we're doing. How many people have really clear gift acceptance policies and procedures at their organization? So not as many hands as I frankly would expect, but this is a great scenario where having really good, solid policies and procedures helps you. Because even though most organizations that I know of don't have a lot of these type of gifts every year, which then makes it a little more complicated to handle. If you've got an office and this is routine, probably not much of an issue, but when you're only doing a few of these a year or a few of these a decade, it's a big deal, and having those policies and procedures to fall back on is really important.
And to Paul's point, when your donor comes up and says, I want to make this wonderful gift, but here's my time frame, I need it done immediately. This is where you really need to bridge that gap. You've got to have the right people at the table, and your donors' advisors can have all of the impact in the world on this, especially in maybe helping to understand it might not happen in their time frame, or that dollar amount that they think it's worth might not be what the market is really going to substantiate. And also, this is the really important time where we do sit down and try to understand what is it that our donor is trying to accomplish and why this particular gift. Gifts that go wrong have gone wrong in this step, where communication, if it's not clear, if transparency is not 100% clear, this is where misunderstandings happen, and then we end up on the cover of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which is not where we want to be. And also, this is by
Not for this reason.
Not for this
I do want to be there, but not for this reason.
Well, not in stripes, anyway. But you all know how I feel about protecting and preserving donor intent. You know, we want to be able to say that our donor is going to chuck us under the chin because we've done a wonderful job, like Rudy Hancock. This is Joe Hancock's with Baptist. No, he moved on. High Point.
Yeah.
But as you can see, he's a happy camper. That's what we want for everyone. We want to continue to be able to jump in the air yelling Yahoo. We want our donors to feel wonderful and go out and buy more designer eyewear. And we want our colleagues to feel like we're really doing our jobs. Going on.
So again, the third part, I think of bridging the gap, and I'll let Chris talk about this one, but certainly is communication and education. So.
This is Willardo. This is my little baby, the adopted long-haired Chihuahua. And you know why you have to have the right people at the table? This child can make me do anything he wants. Very much like what our donors want us to feel, right? I want this, I want what I want when I want it. And having someone else there to be able to say, yeah, I understand why you want it, but you know what, here's why it can't happen. And that might be their attorney. It might be their CPA who could turn around and say, the code says this. Or it might be their financial advisor saying, I know you want to give 3 lots that are just stunning, even when they're underwater. But you might want to consider using this stock that has high capital gain liability, and if you try to sell it yourself, you're going to pay that. Hang on to the lots, maybe do an aquarium, and let's use something that might actually help you as well. Communication and education, folks, we do this every day. And if you think that we don't, take a step back and think about your own donors and the conversations that you have with them. You're sharing with them information about how they can do what they want to do, but do it legally so that they're very happy. And the communication, they are not ATM machines. We don't press a button and the gift comes out. God, if only. But the fact of the matter is, we need to be able to talk to let them know we're on their side, but we are protecting and preserving them and their intent at all time. And yes, of course, this is the cutest dog on the page.
But I think again, part of communication and education is understanding and knowing the differences between counting, accounting, and recognition, right? And it's likely that at least 2, if not all 3 of those are different at our organization. So I think again, that's where really understanding, particularly where your counterparts in business and finance are looking at. And what they want to know about a potential gift is what's listed right here, right? This is a good list for you to know because this is what they want to know. Is it irrevocable? Is it a promise to give or just an intent, right? Someone says to you verbally, I'm going to buy a table at your gala. Is that a promise to give or is that an intent? Is it unconditional, right? Are there any conditions associated with the gift? Is it non-reciprocal? Are there any benefits that they're receiving in exchange? Is it cash or when can it be converted to cash, right? Again, we talked about that earlier, but that's an important point that your counterparts are going to want to know. And is there verifiable documentation? Why? Because there's going to be an audit probably at some point, right? And they're going to want to know if we have the right type of documentation. So if you have things on your checklist Again, I would put these on there to make sure you know. Rocky Iardi Lynn is the national chair this year for CGP, so that's Rocky who's looking inquisitive there.
And you know, earlier when Mel and I started, we were talking about being able to communicate right away between all parties and putting things on paper. If we take that step early, this phase becomes even easier because a lot of it is already down there. You want to see these things happen. You want it to be done this way. Here's the documentation that we'll be looking at. When we get to this point and we're sharing this internally with our colleagues, it makes all of that a lot easier. Communication and education. If we don't communicate anything today, this is the most important component of this presentation. We need to always realize we are communicating and we are educating in everything we do every day. Bridging the gap. We talked about it must be an unconditional transfer of the cash or other assets. That's standing for becoming a donor. That's why the IRS will generate a charitable income tax deduction for a transaction of this nature, because we are divesting ourselves of this gift that we've given. The value, if any, returned to the resource provider is incidental to potential public benefit. Interesting. Something to think about. Unconditional promise to give shall be recognized when it is received, but must contain sufficient evidence in the form of verifiable documentation that a promise was made and received. Okay, heavy. Bottom line, if they say they're going to do it, get documentation. It could be a letter of intent. Granted, that's a handshake on paper, but a lot of times it's enough for a donor to feel like they have made a commitment. If it's something stronger, like a charitable trust, maybe they're making a commitment through their private foundation, get it on paper. It's the way to make sure that both sides of the table understand what's being promised and what is expected from both sides. Some conditions include, considerations include legal enforceability and interaction versus promises. Oh, intentions. I work at Schoolcraft College, I know how to read. Fact of the matter is, it's hard to read up here. These are the standings for being a donor. Catherine Myrie, who I said is my hero, gave a wonderful presentation on standing for being a donor, where promises are nice, but commitments are a totally different thing. Folks, this is a commitment that we're making here when we are a donor. And that's why we're asking for the kind of documentation to be sure that we can follow through on our end, and the expectations that have been set by the donor are going to be followed through.
I think the other important thing to think about in terms of this slide too, and Chris covered the gap definitions, but you see the dog sort of a little bit held back by the fence, not really, I'm sure it could get on through if it wanted to, but again, that's where effective policies and procedures can really help us, right? They show us where the fence line is in terms of our organization and what we've adopted. So again, I think Little replaces that in terms of a resource when you come up with something that's unusual. My experience is also, if you don't have them, another really great reason to have them is to be able to say no to a gift, right? I mean, that, in my experience, is probably when they've been utilized more often than not. So, when I worked for Franklin College years ago, we had a donor who had an emu farm here in Michigan. And she wanted to give that to us, and unfortunately, we were not able to take that. But I've had much stranger gifts than that come across the transom over the course of my career. But again, that's where we're having these policies and procedures. And again, utilizing your colleagues across the organization in terms of the policies and procedures when you're crafting them, going through them. Often, your chief financial officer may be a part of your gift acceptance committee, and probably should be if you're running into something that's unusual. So I think another important point to keep in mind.
last point on this particular slide, folks, it may not be your donor that this is the reason to do. It could be the next generations, especially in situations that are larger contributions that this generation is dedicated to doing. Think about it, 9 times out of 10, the situations that we've read about that went wrong were not the donor, but their family. So that's why your policies and procedures are so important and why documentation is so critical. That is going to protect your donor's intent. That is going to protect the reputation of your organization and you.
So we have little Susie Sheffield here to usher us into the 10 more steps to success, and these are related to the things that we've talked about previously, but I think 10 additional points that Chris and I thought were really important to keep in mind. Number one, starting with the strategy. I think of all the clients that I deal with, this is probably the number one issue. Development goals are being developed in a vacuum. The organization may be developing, maybe not developing a strategic plan or strategy, or really even understanding what they need and why. To the extent that you have the opportunity to influence your organization to start the discussion with strategy, the better off you're going to be. Development goals and plans should be an outcropping of a much larger organizational strategic plan. And I have yet to see an organization that actually applies development potential to their strategic plan. I very often don't even see finances associated with goals in a strategic plan, how much something is going to cost. I have yet to see, and do we have the capacity to raise funds for that thing, or do we need to finance it some other way? So to the extent that you have an ability to influence that conversation, highly recommend it.
Avoid developing goals in a silo. What a statement. Bottom line, it happens more times than not. And then a lot of times we're left trying to figure out how are we going to raise dollars for a situation that we weren't involved in creating. Or all of a sudden a building has been built and there's no name on it. Why? Because no one talked about maybe getting a donor to make the initial gift on it, and it's named after them, or something that they see is important. Make sure that across your entire organization, you're talking about what you want to do, what they need to do, how you can work together to make those goals that are actually attainable, and how we can make sure everybody is successful. Don't be a lone ranger.
Be mindful of the future, and sort of what we mean here, particularly in terms of campaign, is don't rob your future campaigns by counting something now that isn't going to come to fruition for a long time. So I'm aware of a situation very intimately where someone gave a $10 million gift on paper to an organization at age 50. And guess what? 20 years later, when the next really huge campaign rolls around, that person restates their $10 million gift and decides they want to change the purpose a little bit, and guess what? It's already been counted in a campaign. So, age 50 is a little young, in my opinion, for you to be counting some deferred gifts. So, again, counting policies and procedures, I can't stress that enough, is super important. But again, be mindful of the future. Most organizations are going to have multiple campaigns between ages 50 and 85 for most donors. So think about that as you're developing your goals too.
Yeah, don't forget, they could turn around and say, well, you got a $10 million gift before, just do it again. Be dedicated to education. Ourselves, our donors, our colleagues on both sides of the table. Knowledge is power, folks, and the more that we are aware of things, the more that we share, the more that we point out things that are important and useful, every gift scenario can end up being just a little bit easier because we've been learning from the past and we're applying things that we've learned from others. We've got a great gift planning community. When we share, it makes life a lot easier for all of us. Success breeds success.
So you know the business of your business, so you don't have to raise your hand, but do you know the annual operating budget for your organization? Okay, that's great. I know a lot of people who don't. I know a lot of people who don't. Do you know the annual operating budget for your division? Right? So know the business of your business. Know and understand why you're doing what you're doing, why the organization needs what it needs, what your primary priorities are for the organization, even if they're things you're not actively raising money for. those are all really important things to know, particularly, again, when you're working with colleagues across an organization, because they may have a different lens. So I think that's incredibly important.
Fill the information void. Again, crucial, communication. There is nothing worse than when you're sitting there waiting to hear something on a situation. If the property is sold, what it's been valued at. Our donors feel the same way. We don't like to be left hanging on a limb waiting to hear if something is going to work or not. Even if you're just calling your donor to say, okay, nothing's happened yet, but I want you to know people are working on it. Stay calm, we'll be back to you ASAP. That call can mean so much to everybody. It means you know who they are and you care about their feelings. On the converse side, don't be afraid to call someone that you're waiting for information on. Too many times we think, I sent an email, or they sent me an email, everything's in order. Don't count on that. Emails get lost in cyberspace too. So communicate, fill in the void, don't be afraid to talk.
In the absence of information, that void gets filled, and it's often filled with information that isn't accurate. So help out there where you can. Don't promise what you can't deliver. So this sort of gets back to, again, we're sort of on the front end, right, of many of these gifts, that we want to make sure that what we're promising a donor is something that the organization can actually deliver. And it's super tempting, right, in the era when metrics are so important and we're measured by what we do, to sometimes, take a gift and we're not so certain someone across the organization is going to be able to do that thing. I think it's a big problem. Ideas are easy, execution is really hard. And I think, again, that's one of the things where maybe not just with your finance colleague, but if there's a program officer or someone else in the organization who's going to be responsible for executing when this gift comes in, guess what? The more close they are, hopefully even involved in the solicitation process, the better off our chances of this being a pleasant experience for both the organization and the donor.
Jack, be nimble. This is not to say we should all go out and learn how to do the lambada. It is to remind you that Murphy's Law is always out there. Anything can happen at any time, and we need to always be flexible. We are gift planners, so we should always be looking for alternate plan A, B, and C, and able to communicate that. Because remember, best laid plans, exactly. So be flexible enough to say, okay, this isn't going to work, so why don't we look at this? And many times that's when your donor relationship gets even stronger. Because instead of saying, no, no, never, you're saying, can't do this, but let's talk. What else can we do here? I want to make your goal a reality. Be nimble.
Hone your negotiation skills, and we talked about this a little bit easier, but we are the person in the middle, right? There are a lot of good resources out there in terms of negotiation, but I think it's incredibly important, again, the more we know and understand the perspective of the language of those that we're working between, the better off we are going to be. We are the chief negotiator, right, in terms of these transactions with our organization. That is really one of our key responsibilities. So again, all of the things we've talked about today, but particularly transparency and communication is so incredibly key to doing that.
And let's not forget one thing. We are all playing on the same team, right? The goal here is to make a successful gift that we can all be proud of, that we can all point to and say, if we did this, we can move on and do that. And even though sometimes someone may come in and we want to call a me or because they're saying it'll never work, we're doomed, they've got a reason for thinking that. If we can talk to them, again, we can communicate it, if we can talk about options and opportunities, maybe they will turn around and want to see it happen as well. There's no I in team. I don't care what anybody says. And the fact of the matter is, when we play as a team, everybody wins.
So we wanted to do a little bit of a group exercise. We're down to 5 minutes, so we may not necessarily have time, but if anyone wants to tackle one of these in the last 5 minutes, we just left a little bit of time for questions at the end. But, you know, did you have any sort of complex gift like what we're talking about? Did the gift end up happening? And if so, did it change significantly from its original format? And then could you share a tip? Would you have done something differently if you could turn back the clock, or would you absolutely do it the same way again? And in the end, was it a good gift? Does anyone have a unique example that they would like to share with the group that maybe was a little more complex and created a little bit of an issue, but you were able to work through it? Anything come to mind for anyone? Sure, yeah.
So there was a capital campaign to build a new building for memory care and also to establish a $1 million a fund for programming within that. It was not clarified during the course of the solicitations to all of the donors that future gifts, planned gifts would be difficult if you were actually building a building and you were establishing the endowment. But those were also accepted. So it was obvious that we had enough to build the building, but what was going to suffer was the amount going into this endowment. And yet we were making the promise that there were specific funds available for memory care programming. So I took a look and said, okay, it's going to be quite a while for us to realize these gifts, and especially because we did not want people to pass away to realize the gifts. So I did develop a bridging fund. And I looked at how much would that endowment be spinning off in investment earnings, and that was the amount that maybe for 5 years we were going to need in order to fulfill the promise while we were waiting for these to come in. And so we did raise $500,000 to be the bridge fund, but because I didn't know how to carry through on the promise and deliver the programming if we didn't have that.
Beautiful planning.
Excellent. And my sense is probably your colleagues in business and finance were also happy with that solution as well.
I hope so. Yeah, they were.
Good, good.
Well,
Excellent.
and remember folks, when planned gifts are part of your capital campaign, it's not inappropriate to talk about using some of the new disposable income that they're generating to give towards a bridge fund, or to give immediately towards that endowed fund to make sure that programs are going on there. They're buying into what is going to be a legacy for them and an impact for an organization they believe in. Educate, talk about options, opportunities, and how they can be even more impactful. And you know, another thing is, it's never inappropriate to say, you're doing such an amazing thing for us. Are there others who are as dedicated or would be as interested as you are? Can you introduce me to anybody else? Do you want to have lunch with them? It's just a way to make our donors always feel that they are part of our organization and not just a number on a page. What else, folks?
Other questions? Yeah.
Just from an advisor perspective, and I think your presentation is fantastic, when you're going through the education part, you might want to say, especially for a larger either gift that is kind of not been, you know, repeated in the past, or a big planned gift, is say, are you working with advisors we should be aware of? Because, you know, they might be talking about, not necessarily the real estate as much, but, you know, they could be 70 and a half, and it really would make sense for them to take a gift from their IRA versus stock, you know, all these different things. And you might not be aware that, like, Northern Trust might have a plan in our mind too of like how things should flow. And before you when you're getting things down on paper, it might be a really good way to say, you know, are there advisors that you work with that we should connect with before we kind of put pen to paper? Because that really helps, you know, make the gift more efficient and easier for them to understand if they're hearing the same message from their advisors as they are from their.
Absolutely. That's, when we were talking about who should be at the table, those are absolutely questions. I don't think we should ever start a conversation with a donor, current or prospect, without finding out little things like, who is your attorney? Who is your CPA? Who is your financial advisor or your private banker? For a lot of reasons. Number one, like you said, Rebecca, if we're all saying the same thing, if we're all saying this is a good idea, the donor can be that much more comfortable in going forward. We can't all be wrong. Number two, we are constantly looking to build our professional networks, people who we know we can work with, who will work with our donor like it was us doing it for them. And they can feel when they introduce a client to us that we will treat their client with the same respect that they give them. That's where that unity and that communication and that education really comes into play.
And it's a really important point. We don't want to show up back at our organizations having accepted this gift, right? Without having had some conversations prior to walking away from the meeting with Jenny. So really, really good point. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll see you guys.